is Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ. And as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. Now, here's Elisa.
It is Sunday, June 25th, 2023, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio and on YouTube on the Ancient Faith Ministries page. I'm Elisa Bielatich-Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. We get together every Sunday night to meet another everyday Orthodox Christian and to build community through conversation. In North America, Orthodoxy can feel a little fragmented because we worship in different jurisdictions, sometimes in different languages or even on different calendars. But I think real Orthodox unity is not about calendars and administration. I think it's about getting to know each other and about thinking of one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. So this is our small contribution to that. And meanwhile, we just get to meet really nice people and get to know them. So I enjoy this very much, and I'm so glad that you're joining us tonight to meet another everyday Orthodox Christian. I want to let you know that, of course, our show, as always, is being produced by Matushka Trudy Richter, and she's taking your calls. So if you want to join the conversation, you can call in at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Matushka Trudy will answer the call, and she'll patch you through, and you can ask our guest a question if you would like. We are live on the Ancient Faith app. We're on the Ancient Faith website. We stream on Ancient Faith's Facebook page, and we stream on YouTube now with video, which is very, very exciting. So if you want to actually get a look at us, come on over to the YouTube page and you'll see us. But without any further ado, let me tell you about our guest tonight. Tonight we have Amalyssa Johnson on the program, and I'm really excited. Dr. Johnson is a clinical psychologist and a former school psychologist. So she has 20 years of experience in the assessment and treatment of clinical disorders of children and teenagers. So, I have a lot of kids and I have a lot of questions for her, but I might have to save some of those for off the air. But she specializes in working with children, teens, and adults with autism spectrum and anxiety disorders, but she has expertise working in individuals with depression, OCD, attachment disorders, so she does all sorts of things. But Dr. Johnson joined the Orthodox Church in 2006, and so she was at St. George Orthodox Church. And then, she got married. Her family's moved around a little bit. They spent some time in Abilene, where she was in a mission. And as those of you who've lived in missions know, you learn how to do everything when you're in the mission. It's actually a great way to become proficient in all the areas of Orthodox life. So she was, baking bread and teaching Sunday school and doing all this stuff. They've moved around a little bit more since then, but at this point, she's now in Sugar Land, Texas, which is just outside of Houston, and she's at St. George's Cathedral, so it's a beautiful parish. So without any further ado, Amalyssa, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Elisa. I am truly honored and humbled to be here. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, it's so fun. I'm so glad that we were able to. I know we spent a while rescheduling, and now here we are, and I'm so happy about it. But okay, so let's start at the very beginning, right? So because you converted to Orthodoxy, so I have no guess even, where were you born, and what was your family like? What was everything like at the beginning?
Right. Well, I just have to first tell you that, I, as a psychologist, my job is mostly to listen. And so talking about myself is, it really is a stretch for me. And so but I appreciate the opportunity. But actually, I'm back home now. So I was born in Richmond, Texas, which is just right down the road from Sugar Land. My parents both grew up there and met there at a Catholic church. And I like to say my mom graduated from high school in She was 17 years old. She got married when she was 18, and she had me when she was 19. So so shortly after I was born, then they moved to Sugar Land. And so I was born and raised in Sugar Land, lived practically in the same house since I was 4 years old. The other part of my story is that my brother was born 11 months after me. So I never really had, I don't have memories of life without him, but he definitely was a big part of my growing up and who I became, because I was your typical firstborn, high achieving and obedient. I learned very quickly that my brother had a lot of personality, and he was your typical secondborn. So there wasn't a lot of room for me anyway. So I just observed him literally having just the time of his life, getting in trouble all the time. And it didn't take long for me to figure out that I didn't want as many spankings as he got. So I was going to walk the line. And so I was a very serious, obedient child, because my brother was the one, kind of carrying the room.
Right.
He very much had so much personality, and does to this day. We call it, I was Sissy, he was Bubba, and it was the two of us for a really long time. And so the other part of those early years is my parents met at St. John Fisher, which is a Catholic church in Richmond. They were very Catholic. My dad is 6 years older than my mom, so they didn't necessarily grow up together. They also lived a street apart from each other. Literally to this day, my grandparents are a street apart from each other in Richmond, Texas.
Wow.
And so they grew up together, but they grew up in the same, they grew up in the same area, but not necessarily at the same time. So he was older, but yeah, so they met at church, very involved in the church, in the Catholic Church. And so we definitely were raised in the church. My parents played the guitar. Both of them played the guitar. They both were part of the choir in church. And so the Catholic Church was a big part of who they were. And so when we were born, we were very Catholic. My dad, God bless him, his mom died when he was 2 years old. So he was raised by a bunch of different people, but the church was his home, and the Catholic Church was very much his home. And he found a mother and Mary, and so that made a big impact on who he was. And so that kind of trickled down to our raising from the very get-go.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is really lovely. Wow. And I would just say, so your mom actually graduated high school, got married 19, had you at 20, had a second child at 21. So she was actually just every year, just changing her life profoundly.
Well, those 2 years, but then there was a stint, because I am the oldest of 5. And so that is very much a part of my identity, because from an early age, and my mom came, we're Mexican family. So my mom came from 7, my dad came from 8. And so they were, both of their parents were cotton farmers. They were sharecroppers. They knew how to, take care of kids and have them. So from an early age, I was put in charge of, because after my first brother was born, then my mom had then 3 others kind of sequentially after about 5 years. So I was about 6 years old when my second brother was born, and then 7 when my sister was born, and then 12 when my other sister was born. And so it was just part of the culture that people would always see us and they would ask my mom things like, I don't know, how do you do it? And with 4 kids or 5 kids, and my mom would always say, well, the big ones just take care of the little ones.
Yep.
it's easy.
Yep. She did it the right way though, right? Because it's like having two flights, right? Like you
Yes.
have the first two
Yeah.
and then she's doing all the work and getting you up. But
Yes.
I mean, once you're 6 or 7, you can help out with a toddler for sure.
Oh, yes.
You
Yes,
know,
you can.
as the mom of a big family, I'll tell you, they can. And if they have the right disposition for it, it works out very, very nicely. Did you have a good disposition for dealing with a lot of little siblings?
Yes, I love children. I loved being around kids. I love taking care. And I was affirmed for being obedient because, like I said, my brother was the tyrant. I was like always too much energy and getting into trouble. So I learned really quickly how to survive in that environment. And coming from such a big family, I learned, yeah, my role was to caregive, and that was just a natural. I love taking care of babies to this day. I'm like it. I have to hold myself back from, grabbing babies, holding them and wanting to help and, things like that. So yeah, I mean, I was very, I mean, there's pictures of me at 7 years old with babies on my hip and, taking care of my siblings. And so I was a natural caregiver. My mom, she, I watched her and she taught me exactly, what to do to change diapers and make bottles and make
Hmm.
lunch and dinner. And then when I was actually in 5th grade, my parents opened a restaurant and
Oh,
a
wow.
Mexican restaurant in Sugarland.
Oh, that's a
And
lot of work. Like, that's
it
hard.
was a lot of work, and
Wow.
but they knew that I was old enough to be able to kind of take care of things at home, and and they did that. It only lasted for about a year and a half, thank God, for my sake. But
I was going to say, did you say you were 12?
yeah, I was younger than that. I was probably about 10 or 11, and
I
so the
mean, and you
summers
could
were
handle it.
spent.
And
Mhm.
I can
Yeah.
understand how it's so good for the family to own a business and all of these things. But, my parents had a small business and it's a lot. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work and it's a lot of wear and tear emotionally
Yes.
too. So and on
Yeah, it was
you
a
were young to
sacrifice
be
for
taking
everyone.
care of the kids. Yeah. You're like, hey, I didn't get to vote on that sacrifice. What was that all about?
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
and I love my parents. They are amazing individuals, and they were doing what their parents, did to them. My mom is the second of seven, and my dad, he was the baby, but my mom had to take care of her siblings too, and so that's just what you did. And so you learn early on how to take care of children, and luckily, like I said, it was very natural for me, and
Yeah.
so I didn't. There were no complaints, and I certainly wasn't going to complain at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was I even it was for many years that I was in charge of my younger siblings. I even took my younger sister to her college orientation because my parents weren't available to do that. So, I was in that role a lot. And in psychology world, we call that the parentified child. Um, but I don't hold any grudges because it really helped me become who I am today. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be where I'm at today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There are a lot of things that are maybe not like best practices, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily so destructive or that it doesn't, especially, I mean, that's how they were doing it, right? That's how your parents did it.
Exactly.
That's how your grandparents did it. It was just, that's how it's done.
Exactly.
So it didn't seem like, I'm sure
Exactly.
there were a lot of options other than that. So, gosh.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because when you first started talking, you were talking about how, this sense that your brother was the one who acted up. So you knew that that meant that you were going to be on the straight and narrow. And I think some of that is seeing that example of like, oh, that looks unpleasant getting yelled at. But is there
Right.
also some truth I want to ask you as a psychologist? Like, is it true that, so just background, I have a lot of kids and we started noticing that, one kid would be in trouble all the time and then when they'd kind of turn around their behavior, a different kid would suddenly start being in
Mhm.
trouble all the time. And I have actually heard and read here and there that, yeah, that kids recognize that, like, right now I can't be acting up because mom and dad are overwhelmed by this sibling. Oh, good. Now it's my turn. And it's like, what
For
is that?
sure.
What is that?
Yeah, 100%. Children are in tune. They're like emotional barometers, right? So we can sense that our our parent. I mean, we're loyal to our parents. We love them. We want them to be in good places, right? And we want their approval. And so, if we see stress over there, I mean, that is very intuitive. Not all kids are noticing these things, but a lot of them are. And so if they see that's happening, well, yeah, you just know, like, it's not my time. And I think the more children you have, then you're in a bigger group. And so you naturally have to figure out how to navigate your role. Some of it is just literally subconscious, and you just know, and that it's not going to be the right time. I'm not going to really get what I want if I do it right now. If I act out right now, it's not going to benefit me. So, we say all the time, kids are so smart, and they are. They're really smart, and they pick up on what their parents are doing. And so no pressure or anything like that.
Right. I
They
mean,
really are in tune because they want their parents to be happy, and they want to please parents. Most children want to be approving and pleased, but not all children are able. So,
right.
so yeah,
Yeah, I'd say I run
absolutely.
about an 80% rate on that. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that that's so interesting because ultimately what it means is that we're shaped not just by like our parents and by our genes, but also even by our
Hmm.
siblings, right? Like
Hmm.
that the
Oh,
personalities of our
100%.
siblings in a big family especially, right? Like you have to figure out like what's not already taken. Like what's
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And children, and I've seen it in my practice play out over and over with parents who get divorced, or, parents that just are struggling with different things. Children recognize their role pretty quickly. That's how we have all the birth order research as well. Like, if you're the baby of the family, you just kind of got to get in where you fit in, because this family's been functioning this way
yeah,
for so long, right?
that's
So it's intuitive for a lot of kids. But yeah,
that's
the interesting thing, yeah, is just, birth order fascinates me, and my family kind of fell along that pretty easily. So yeah, I mean, I was very serious. I was taught how to be obedient, how to take care of children, how to manage and take care of a lot of things.
mm,
And so it wasn't until the others were born that I felt like I didn't really have, I had those early years where I could be a kid and have fun. But once the others came along, then it was like, yep, business.
yep, yep. You became sort of an adult before your time a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
it make you anxious as a kid to feel like there was too much, or did you just roll with it?
I didn't feel like it was too much, but I took on the role very seriously.
Oh,
So it was anxious in that respect, that it's my job, you know. And
wow.
again, like my parents, I like have I've gone through a lot of therapy myself. So, I am. My parents did what they knew to do. They knew they had to feed me and clothe me and keep me warm. They didn't know how to emotionally support. And so it would have been nice, at some point to have somebody say, listen, like, we got this. You don't have to take care of, shaping these things. But that was just natural for me. But it made me, and that's what honestly made me want to become a psychologist was, my youngest my younger sister. She's the older one, she's 8 years younger than me. She had a traumatic experience where she was put on, the wrong bus, on her first day of kindergarten. And she was, um, it was very traumatic, because she had to tell the bus driver as a 5 year older how to get home,
Oh,
the wrong
geez.
bus driver. And so that was very traumatic for her. And that just, it
Oh,
led to a lot of separation anxiety at 5 years
yeah.
old. So I kind of observed that. And it wasn't until she actually visited with, a family member who was a counselor, that she really got better. And so I saw that, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to help kids in that way. I want to be present for them in that way. And so yeah, I mean, because I was so engaged with my siblings and my family, um, that helped me, be aware that that was going on. And so I wanted to be a psychologist. I didn't know at the time it was a psychologist, but definitely wanted to be somebody that could help kids in that way.
Yeah. So really your experiences did very much lead to who you are today. Like very in
Yeah, my
that sense that,
family.
well, even in inspiring what your career would be.
Yeah,
That's neat.
definitely. My siblings are a huge part of who I am. And the interesting thing is that I have a singleton. I have an only child, and that's just another part of the story. But so yeah, that's been interesting.
Yeah.
Not having all of those other
Right.
people to
Well, and then
meet.
you have to try to relate to that experience, and you're like, yeah, you have no idea what mine was.
Exactly,
You have to resist
exactly.
saying, like, my life was so much harder, dear.
Right, exactly. You have no idea. Exactly.
That's funny. So when you were
Yeah.
like in school, elementary school, middle school,
Mhm.
what did you like? What were you like in school? Were you also pretty serious in school? Were you very serious about excelling, or I mean, did you have time to be doing homework? Were you swamped with the kids, or how
Yeah.
was it?
Oh, yes. I mean, my parents, that's the other thing is that they were very much um, supportive of academics.
Sure.
They left Richmond and moved to Sugar Land because the environment that they grew up in was sharecroppers, very poor, and they moved to Sugar Land to provide a better life. And so I was sent to school with the message from day one that you can be whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. And so academics came easy for me, and it was they were more engaged academically, if anything. They didn't help me with my homework so much, but they were making sure I was bringing home good grades. So
Yeah.
um,
They
I
were
was a
aware.
very serious student. I was very studious and I wanted to do well academically. So, and luckily that was easy for me. So it came, again, as compared to my brother, it wasn't the same situation.
Right.
But for me, it was easy and I took school very seriously. Um, because we grew up in a neighborhood, and again, I was a child of the 80s. And so I was born in 79. So I was very much a child of the 80s where we did play outside. Um, we went to school, we came home, we were outside until the street light came on. So we certainly had the opportunity to play. Um, but at school, I went to school with kids that also went to my church. So we went to a church, a Catholic church that was, pretty integrated into the same people I was going to school with. It was in the same neighborhood, and so
Nice.
that was made it simple. I was around people in elementary school that were also Catholic,
Yeah.
and so that made it simple. And they were also academically inclined, and so it wasn't hard for me
Yeah.
academically.
Gosh, that is
Yeah.
something that as Orthodox Christians in the United States, we miss out on a lot, right? Is like, it's
Hmm.
so rare for us to live in the neighborhood with our church, to have all of our fellow parishioners scattered about the neighborhood, our kids playing together. Here and there, people get lucky, but that
Yeah.
that must
That
have
has
been a
not been
really
our
beautiful thing.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of why my Catholic faith was so foundational, and me finding orthodoxy just because of
Yeah.
those things. But unfortunately, my son does not have that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and for the most part, we have a lot of sort of commuter parishes, right? We're all driving
Hmm.
in from half an hour away. Our kids are the only ones at their
Yes,
school. That's a shame. That's really a
I
shame.
know it really is. I hate it.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, especially here,
Yeah.
just as you said that, that, oh, and all the kids in the
Hmm.
parish were there in the same school. It's like, oh, that's
Yeah, like everybody
great.
had CCE on Wednesday nights, and everybody had life group on life teen on Sunday nights. It was just
Yeah.
like that's what everyone was doing. So it made it real simple. And then my parents, when we got to middle school, were the youth ministers at the church, and my dad always had a dream to be a deacon in the Catholic Church, but with 5 kids, it wasn't going to be doable because it's quite a commitment. And so
Mhm.
he is currently a deacon in the Catholic
Oh,
Church, my
good.
dad. And but he didn't start that journey until we were all out of the house.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very much a part of our lives growing up.
That's neat. That's neat.
Yeah.
And as you got into high school, then I assume the church is still going and the friends are still going in the family. Was that at that point, were you starting to think psychology, or were you kind of all over the place? Sometimes in high school, we're all over the place. Like, what were you thinking?
Yeah. So I didn't really think too much about it. I knew I was going to do something. And like I said, I was probably leaving middle school when I figured out that I wanted to be like working with children. And I didn't know, did I want to be a teacher or a counselor per se? So I tried to really just enjoy my high school experience. I knew I would go to college. My dad went to Texas A&M. And so he didn't graduate from there, but I like to say like I was raised an Aggie because I could recite the Aggie war hymn at 4 years old.
Right.
And we went to bonfire. We did all the football things. We did
Right.
football and cheer. I was a cheerleader from the time I was 4 years old till basically my sophomore year in college. And so that
That's
football was a big part of our life.
wow.
And so I just knew I was going to go to A&M. I just knew that was going to be what I was going to do. And
I mean,
what
for our
I was going to
listeners who
do,
are not
actually, I
from
didn't know.
Texas, like that's a thing here, right? Like there are A&M families, there are like University of Texas families, and like, even Texas Tech, I think, like
Yes.
people sort of grow up in the family and everybody in that family just all goes to the same school. I've never seen
Yeah.
it anywhere
It's
else,
just
but
what
it's
you
a
do.
big thing in Texas.
It
And it's a
really
big
is.
identifier, like when we moved here, my kids were already younger and people would say to them like, "Oh, is your family Aggie or UT?" And they're just like, they'd come home, they're like, "What are they
What?
talking about?" I'm like, "I don't know, honey, it's a Texas thing."
I know. It really is a Texas thing. It's so, yeah, I'll say weird. But yes,
I mean,
so
it's
the
beautiful too.
interesting thing,
It can be neat. It can be really, really
I
neat.
love the community. I love the
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
definitely some good things. But that literally just made it simple for me. I just knew that's where I was going to college.
There
But when the
you go.
time came, I actually only applied, and my dad went to college for 2 years, but he didn't finish. My mom did not go to university, but she always worked, and um, I just knew I was going to go to A&M, so I applied to A&M. That was the only college I applied to, and I got in, had a roommate, and everything. That's just where I was going to go.
That could have gone
Then
sideways. Like that is so dangerous.
I know. Totally. But I mean, it just was what you do. I mean, there wasn't an option. And maybe that was, subconsciously part of me trying to work so hard, um, so that I wouldn't have a question. And so,
Yeah.
but once I was going I mean, like I said, I even had a roommate. But on a whim, I decided to apply to St. Edward's University, which is a small Catholic university in Austin. And I got in because my cousin had gone there. I got in, and then they offered me this like really big academic scholarship. And so I was like, well, A&M is not going to give me any money to go there. I wasn't that smart. But St. Edward's is offering me a lot of money to go here. So that's where I ended up going. And
Oh, cool.
my dad visited me after he dropped me off there. He visited me once because it was in Austin, which is, TSIP country, which is that's the
Right.
University. That's
Oh,
where
yeah. That's
University
the
of
other
Texas
part, by the
is.
way. Aggies don't even enter like Austin zip codes. They're so horrified by it. It's hilarious. Crazy.
It's unbelievable. So yeah, I mean, so I ended up going to St. Edward's, and it was a blessing because it was a smaller school. I did really well there, and luckily I had a professor that knew I wanted to go further. At that point, then I knew I wanted to be a psychologist, and a lot of people want to major in psychology as undergrads, but not a lot of people want to go all the way. You can't really do much with a bachelor's in psychology.
Right.
You can do some things with a master's, but in Texas, if you want to be a psychologist, you have to have a PhD.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a blessing for me to be there. So
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, St. Edward's
yeah,
is a neat school. It's really,
it
people
really
who
is.
go there just love it. They're not
Yes.
crazy like A&M or something. They just quietly love their school.
Well, they didn't even have a
Going to other
football team.
states. That's right. I mean, gosh, what's the point? But all right.
Exactly.
Well, we're going to take a
Exactly.
very short break and we'll be back with Dr. Amalyssa Johnson.
For all of us, male or female, parent or not. That's what it's often like, isn't it? It's at the end of our own tether that the miracle happens. It is in our greatest weakness that God's strength is known. It's when we decrease that He can increase. It's in losing our life that we find it. To put it another way, it's in the spot where Saint Morwenna falls down, exhausted, that her spring rises up. It's when the people of God curse Moses in the wilderness and wish themselves back in Egypt that they hear the crack of the staff, the gush of water through the rock. It's when God Himself is spat upon and mocked and bleeding and dead that the glorious resurrection is ushered in.
From 7 Holy Women, Conversations with Saints and Friends, now available as an audiobook at Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Amalyssa Davis, and we are here tonight with Dr. Amalyssa Johnson. So Amalyssa, so you're at St. Ed's. You've got a professor who kind of understands what you want to do. What ended up happening? Did you...
Well, I knew that I wanted to be a PhD clinical psychologist. I had figured out that that's what I wanted to do. I had enough professors there that I had, I love psychology. I was very interested. And once I got into my major, really enjoyed the classes. And my dream was to be able to help children the best I could. So I figured out like a PhD clinical psychologist, that's what I want to do. So luckily my professor told me, well, yeah, you're going to have to go to graduate school for that. So here's what you need to do. So you're going to need to take the GRE. Because I didn't have anybody to guide me. I didn't know, I didn't have any family to know what I was doing. And so they guided me through the process. They said, this is the book of graduate schools in the country and, surrounding areas. And you start looking through this and decide, so I learned then that there was like developmental psychology, there was all kinds of psychologies, and I didn't know that. And so I kind of just stuck though with clinical psychology, but I applied to a ton of different schools. I took the GRE and I got into, because I was very Catholic at the time, I had a goal to go to Notre Dame, and because Notre Dame was like a sister school to St. Edward's. And so I wanted to go to Notre Dame in their clinical psych program. I didn't get into their clinical psych program, got to get into their developmental psych program, which is very different. And so basically it was that or Texas Tech. And Texas Tech clinical psychology program, I had applied to a few others, but Texas Tech was the program that really wanted me. And so I said yes. And so thank God, I got into their program, and I guess the rest is history.
I can't imagine a nice Catholic girl turning down Notre Dame. That's hard to do. That's like turning down A&M. You're like a trailblazer for sure.
Yeah, it was like I have to go with what I know. And I had a relationship with the Lord at the time, and so like I just felt like God made it really simple for me. And because I didn't get into their clinical psych program, it was like, yeah, I don't think this is really what you want to do. And so like he just made it really easy on me. And so I listened and was blessed by that journey.
It's kind of neat though, because really, as someone who grew up always kind of taking care of the siblings and doing what she was supposed to do and helping out. And while, you may have enjoyed it, at the same time, there are other kids who would have said, no, I want to go do my own thing, right? But then when it came time for the big decisions, you were like, no, I really need to do what's right for me and not the thing that might please everybody or might look best.
Definitely. I don't know what happened, but I couldn't. And to be honest, Notre Dame was in Indiana, Texas Tech was in Texas. So
right. Some people would be like, obviously you go to Notre Dame because it's not in Lubbock, Texas, which is hot.
Right.
But you didn't know better. You were from Texas. You're like,
Right,
this weather's
exactly.
fine. Surely it's not
When I
better
got to
somewhere else.
Lubbock, I mean, but honestly, when I got to Lubbock, I thought I was on another planet. Like I had
Yeah.
never been in any place like that.
Yeah. No,
So yeah,
Texas is
it
so
was it
big
was an
and the
adventure.
regions are so different, right? Because where you grew up would have been humid, right? Like you were
Very.
coastal, humid,
Yes.
like
Yes.
Louisiana kind of weather. And then you moved up to
Whole
Lubbock
other
and
dry
that's like
heat.
New Mexico, right? Like that's,
Exactly. I may as well have been in New Mexico.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
But going to Lubbock as a Catholic person, that's where my faith really, I would say, grew, because it was 10 hours away from home, and people there were trying to save me, because they are very Church of Christ. It's a Church of Christ area, and a lot of non-denominational and Baptist people. And I grew up in a very insulated Catholic community. My parents wouldn't allow me to go to Young Life at the Baptist church. They wouldn't allow me those experiences. I think I went to one and I didn't know any better, but I was saved there again because there was an altar call, and they asked, do you have Jesus in your heart? Do you want Jesus in your heart? And I was like, yes, and yes. And I was,
Right?
so I just didn't know any better. And so my husband and I joke that I've been saved many, many times, in that experience.
But
So
I mean, I think from the Catholic and Orthodox perspective, right? Like that doesn't make sense because it's like,
no,
well, you don't just get saved the one time. Like, what do you
right.
mean? Like, I wasn't
Exactly.
saved before and I'm going to be saved from here on out. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I actually
Yeah.
think that any Catholic or Orthodox kid in the same position would just be like, do I want Jesus in my heart? Obviously, why isn't
Well,
everybody getting up?
yeah,
Like, why aren't we
exactly.
all saying yes today and every day, always?
Exactly. Right. Absolutely. So yeah, so when I went to Lubbock, people were trying to save me, and they literally came to my house, and I was like, I'm good. I'm, like I know who the Lord is, and you don't have to worry about me. So, but I had a very good friend who was non-denominational. She was my best friend, and she was in my program, and she is the person that God said, I'm giving you this person to get through this time with you. And God has moved in my life in that way since I've been born. So that was my friend Jennifer, and we were in the same program, and she was non-denominational, oldest of 4 kids. We were very similar in many ways, and our faith kind of just drove everything that we did in a world of academics where faith wasn't to be spoken about at all. And so we lived together, and I would go to praise and worship with her. I would do all of these things that kind of my parents never really let me do before, but I really enjoyed. And so it was learning, um, that, because I really, fortunately was raised with the mentality that if you weren't Catholic, then you weren't going to heaven. And that was a message that was given, that was the only way. And so then once I had met Jennifer, I really questioned a lot of the things that I had been taught. And so I was already really growing even more in my faith at that time in graduate school. Never mind the psychology world that is very secular.
Right.
And so I had to really figure some things out for myself.
Yeah. So would you describe it then as, were you becoming maybe frustrated with Catholicism and moving away from it, or was it more just adding to it?
I was very frustrated at that time, very frustrated. And not that I was moving away from it, because it was part of my everyday. I still went to Catholic church on Sundays, but I was able to think flexibly about it. In a way that I could kind of say, like, I might not agree with that, but I get this. And I
Right.
could kind of say, like, I'm not fully in agreement with that, but I'm okay.
Mhm.
I'll still stay here.
Yeah.
But I don't understand it fully, but wasn't that big of a, you know, um, I wasn't a rebel. And so I wasn't going to.
That would be your brother.
Right. Exactly.
That's funny.
Exactly. Well, at that time, I wasn't a rebel. I was a rebel, though. Fast forward some years, and later when that's how I became Orthodox, because
So
then
what
I
happened
later
there?
on had to.
Yeah.
So I started to, I feel like I call it like I started to be already primed, to really be more open and flexible in my thinking about my faith. And it really was the non-denominational praise and worship that I really started, it became more real. I started reading my Bible every morning. I started having quiet time. I had, really started dating other people that weren't just Catholic, things like that. And um, so once I was almost done with my PhD, I moved back to Sugar Land, and that is when I met my husband. And so again, like, I wasn't completely pleased with the Catholic faith, but I felt like I had my own, like, I knew how to make peace with what was going on. And so, and I had never heard of the Orthodox Church growing up,
Right.
never. And so once I had met my husband, though, it was a good friend that introduced us, and we were very serious. And at this point, and I know we're short on time, but like at this
We have
point in my
plenty of
life,
time. No, you got to tell them. These are always the best stories. Don't skip anything.
so at this point in my life, I was almost done with my PhD. It was 2005, and I had kind of decided that I probably should just be a nun, because I mean, not seriously, but like, I probably maybe would have pursued that, because I had really bad dating experiences,
Gotcha.
and had met a lot of Christian people, men, who say they were Christian but really weren't, and not living the life kind of that I wanted. And because my dad was who he was, the spiritual head of our home, I hadn't really met any men that were wanting to be that. And that is what I knew to be what I wanted in a relationship and a marriage.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I was thinking, it's just not meant for me. And so then I met this man named Ben, and my best friend from college, roommate. I'd known her since I was in 6th grade. She had introduced me to my husband, and they were friends. And her husband and Ben were best friends. And her husband is Terrence, and Terrence had met Ben in the weight room at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston.
Okay.
And so, so Terrence is an orthopedic pediatric surgeon. He's going to finish his residency at Baylor College of Medicine, and then he's going to go to San Diego. Ben is getting his PhD in Baylor College of Medicine in molecular and cellular biology. I can barely say it. So Ben and him are both at Baylor College of Medicine. They have met. They're good friends. Terrence is dating my best friend. And so then Terrence and Ben are friends. So I'm living in Lubbock at the time, but I moved back. So Jennifer's like, hey, do you want to go out? I'm going to bring my friend Ben, because Terrence had moved to San Diego to go do more training.
Okay.
I'm like, sure, bring Ben. Sounds like a nice, good enough guy. So that's how we met. She introduced us.
Lovely guy.
We've been married. We're pushing 17 years now. So Ben at the time, and Ben loves to say this, but I did have a really bad boyfriend at the time. The night that I met Ben, I was dating someone else, and this guy that I was dating,
yes, very sounds like maybe by the next day, no.
But we went out, and my boyfriend came, and Ben also came with. But my boyfriend's not the stellar guy, was kind of off doing his own thing. Ben is getting his PhD. I had never met anybody else that was getting a PhD in anything else but psychology. But he's also, so we literally like geeked out over a research for like 2 hours that night. I don't know where my boyfriend was, and he really didn't care where I was. And so we had this awesome conversation the whole night. And so fast forward, the guy is out of the picture. Ben and I meet up a couple more times because he's still friends with Jennifer, my best friend. And so we start dating, and he would describe his own self as a Protestant mutt. He was raised to kind of go to church where the Spirit led his parents.
Okay.
And so he was raised kind of Lutheran, but they were evangelical free. They were non-denominational. He's the oldest also of 3 boys, I like to say raised on a hog farm in Dodge Center, Minnesota.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's where he was raised. I like to say, I always knew he was from a hog farm in Dodge Center, Minnesota. I just never knew I'd be living on it. So
Well, I mean, Minnesota and Sugarland have some
very
distinct
different.
climate issues. They're
Yes.
a little
Yeah.
different. They're
Yeah.
literally at opposite ends of the country.
Right.
Wow.
Totally. So,
Wow.
so Ben, when we got really serious, had, very faithful man, read his Bible every day. He was the man that I wanted, did not want to break Jesus's heart. Literally, I believe that to this day. So he was who I wanted. And so, however, he did not want to be Catholic. And I already had issues. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to marry you unless we're a common faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so the backstory of that is that his grandfather and his uncle, maternal grandfather and uncle, are memory eternal. His grandfather was an OCA priest, and his uncle is an OCA priest. But they found orthodoxy once Ben's family was already his parents were already married. They were already raising children in the Lutheran church. And orthodoxy was pretty divisive in his family growing up. So there wasn't a good feeling about orthodoxy. He was aware of it and knew about it, but it wasn't part of his upbringing. He knew that his grandparents would come and visit, and then they would go to their own church.
Right.
His grandfather was very zealous and loved the Orthodox Church. And so unfortunately it created some division between his parents, his dad, my father-in-law, and his grandfather. So when we were struggling to find a common ground, because we basically broke up, because I said, if we can't be a common faith, like we can't be together. So I'll be a nun.
Yeah.
So
perfect.
So his uncle did say, have you considered the Orthodox Church? And at that point, then Ben was like, maybe. No, I haven't. But so then he gave me Callisto Swears, or the Orthodox Church book.
Yeah.
I read it.
Yep.
And once you can't unknow. I was like, wow. Ben had his own search for orthodoxy. We kind of broke up. He said, here, go read this book. I'm going to do a search of Orthodox churches in Houston. St. George was the first one that came up. I was reading the Orthodox Church, the book, and that history and all of those things. And I was like, wait, what? So after that, we were like, I was really like, yeah, this makes sense. Every issue that I had in the Catholic Church was resolved for me in the Orthodox Church. So that's how we found orthodoxy. And Ben and I met in May of 2005, and then we were chrismated in September of 2006. And then we were married in 2007, January of 2007. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then after a while, you ended up in Minnesota with him for a while. How was that?
Yes.
Was it a little too cold for you?
Well, I tell people that the weather was the least of my issues moving to Minnesota. The hard part was living on a hog farm.
Yeah.
Growing up in Sugarland, you're very insulated from where your food comes from. You really have no idea.
Because nothing grows in Sugarland because it's so hot. No, actually, there's rice and stuff there, right? But it's like...
Oh, yeah. There's sorghum.
Right.
There definitely are those. But in living in a suburb, you really, you're so far removed from what it takes
Yeah.
for that. And so yeah, I literally was, taken away from everything I knew. And my husband wanted to work with his dad on the farm. And so I had an 18-month-old at the time. And that was really hard. That was really hard because I also had to start working. Being a licensed psychologist, you have to, in order to be a psychologist, you have to be licensed. And so that's not just like, you can do all the schoolwork, but then you have to get licensed. So it doesn't go across state lines.
People might be shocked actually at how much work it is, right? Because you get the PhD, you're still doing all the hours and you're still like under someone else, and there's just a lot involved, and it doesn't cross state lines.
No, it doesn't.
Ooh.
Post COVID, there are more options, but yeah, so I was in a land unknown. I had, a little guy, and I had to take a test. I had to study so that I could start my practice again and build that up. And so that was a really trying time for us. I like to say, next to infertility, which is what we struggled with, moving to Minnesota was the second hardest time in my life.
Yeah, that's a lot on a young marriage too. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
because
Yes.
yeah, a move that big starts to challenge your whole identity, right? Like it's not like across town. It's a big
Yeah,
deal.
no. And when you live on a hog farm, you're usually at least 30 minutes away from like Target. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
They don't
you
often
have
build
to
it next door to
really,
Target.
no,
That's true.
absolutely not on purpose. So,
Yeah, the Target shoppers don't like the smell of the hog farm, I guess.
yeah,
That's fair.
no,
That's fair.
yeah.
But
So that was something I never really, yeah. I mean, I'm proud to be part of it at this point. I'm proud to be part of that industry. I don't take for granted where my food comes from, not 1 second, because people are working literally 24/7 in jobs that nobody would ever want, would ever be willing to do. And so that we can have bacon or, pork chops or, even any food that we have,
yeah.
people are
Well,
working really hard.
especially all of the animal processing kinds of farms, right? There are so many jobs that are
Yes.
difficult and
Yeah.
gross and awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God. But
Yeah.
okay, so you also ended up in Amarillo, and you
Abilene.
oh, was it Abilene? Okay, like
Yeah.
I love that song,
Yeah.
Abilene. But so you were in Abilene in a mission church, and how would you say that being in a mission church impacted your faith? Because I have a theory about it. I feel like mission churches, you grow a lot in a mission church.
Yeah.
Is that how it was for
No,
you?
you're absolutely right. So because my family was so Catholic, and then we became Orthodox, like that was not my parents' most shining moments. So I felt like I was literally living the scripture that, mother will turn against, the children will turn against their parents,
Yeah.
it was really hard. I fought for my faith. I literally fought for my faith and to be Orthodox. And so we were Orthodox in Houston for about a year. And then we were moving to Abilene, Texas. So it was like, wait a minute, we did all this work to be Orthodox, going to church at St. George, which is this beautiful community.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be put in Abilene, but there was a mission church. So we were like, this is God totally leading us. This is okay. This is God saying we can go, because guess what? There's an Orthodox Christian church whom,
That's awesome.
and it really was a miracle. So yeah, so going there really taught me a lot about, I learned a lot about things like, all that's involved. I even chanted. I can't sing if my life depended on it, but I had to chant one time.
Yeah.
My own baby when I would sing to him, would say, no, 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 like, so, I mean, it's bad, but so being put in all of those places really did help me learn more about just kind of where the church and where it comes from and why we do what we do. Because I was in the church just because I wanted to worship Jesus in this way. And it fulfilled me in so many ways, and so it really did. My husband was the parish council president. You get to see the good, the bad, the ugly. And, but I had already fought for my faith before. So no person, no human was going to keep me from worshiping the way I felt God wanted me to do.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
God.
and that's so you guys have made a number of moves and you've been around, but now you're back in Sugar Land. You're
Yes.
back at St. George Cathedral with Father
Yes.
James, right? I love Father
Yes.
James. He's awesome. But
Thank God for him. We love him.
what a great community. And
Hmm.
so you're raising your son in the at St. George.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's been interesting because St. George is home for us, Ben and I, and it's where we found the faith. And it's also where we started our journey on infertility. Saint Father Joseph Honeycutt, he is a saint.
Yeah.
Father Joseph Honeycutt was a priest there at the time. He married us as well. He did the prayers over us for having a baby, and so it was a very special place for us. And but coming back with my son, because he was baptized in Abilene. That's where he was born, baptized there. Total miracle. And, we literally were told there was a 0.0006% chance that we could have a baby. And Father Joseph and Father Philip Lemasters had kind of told us, for us in particular, the further away from the bedroom you take this, and so we just decided that we were going to be parents, but we weren't going to do anything outside of the bedroom. And so we decided we'd adopt in 3 years if we didn't have a baby. And then we got pregnant, and a total miracle. And so, and no baby since, and so it's a total miracle. And he's going to be 13 in August. And so,
Glory to God.
He was baptized in Abilene, but then he's like, I could go on about him. A total wonderful child, the perfect baby, servant's heart. We were in Minnesota so he was 18 months old. We moved to Minnesota. When he was 3 years old, he wanted to serve behind the altar. He wanted to serve. And so our priest at the time allowed it. He was the tiniest person. You could not see over the altar. So that was his home. And so he grew up there serving behind the altar, and was just loved the church. And then we moved, and so for him, it's just like hard because my family's here, my husband's family's there. And my husband's family is not Orthodox, but we had a big, strong church family there. And so so then we moved back to St. George. All that to say, St. George isn't really my son's home.
Yeah.
It's been hard to integrate.
It's your home,
Yes.
but in time, and maybe he'll grow up with two homes. He'll have my teenage years home and my youthful home.
Exactly.
It's hard though. It's hard.
We prepared ourselves that he would live in Minnesota at some point because it's such good memories for him there.
Eventually he'll be back there. There you go.
Yeah.
You can visit at Christmas time. It'll be beautiful with the snow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Amalyssa, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a delight to get to know you. This is just
Thank you.
This is just
Thank
lovely.
God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our audience for joining us. And come on back next Sunday night and we'll meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian.